only. So thanks everyone for tuning in to this Zoominar on the socio-politics of Israel's periphery regions. Hi to folks in the US, Israel, Palestine, other places in the world. This is the latest installment in Partners for Progressive Israel's series called Conversations with Israel and Palestine, a series of informational webinars. I organized this series. My name is Ron Skolnick. Before we get started on a more somber note, I need to read a few remarks from Partners for Progressive Israel President Paul Sham about the latest events in Israel as follows. Partners for Progressive Israel wishes to call attention to and denounce the atrocious series of terrorist attacks in Israel over the last week in Beersheba, Hadera, and Bnei Brak, at least 2 of which were carried out by individuals identified with ISIS. Partners mourns the victims and expresses condolences to the families, but also cautions against efforts by some actors in Israel to cast blame on the Palestinian people collectively. Let me make a sharp pivot to just note that Partners for Progressive Israel is an American nonprofit that's dedicated to the achievement of a durable and just peace between Israel and its neighbors that includes an end to Israel's occupation based on a 2-state solution. Partners supports Israelis working to ensure social justice, civil rights, Jewish-Arab partnership, and equality for all of Israel's inhabitants, and seeks to deepen Americans' understanding of the complexities in the region so they can advocate for a progressive future for all. Partners is glad to be bringing you this webinar for free. And if you enjoy it and want more programming like it, please visit progressiveisrael.org and make a contribution. Now, before I introduce the panelists, I'll just note that after about 40 minutes, there's going to be Q&A with the Zoom audience. If you have questions, and we encourage you to get those questions in early, please put them in the Q&A section, not the chat. The chat will be open, but our moderator won't be looking at the chat to field questions. It'll be much simpler if all the questions are in the Q&A, and please try to limit them to questions, not statements that support the questions. That also helps our panel navigate them. So about 40 minutes in, we'll go to Q&A with the Zoom audience. However, your microphones are turned off, so our moderator will read the questions so that everyone can know what they are. Okay, let me introduce our panel in brief. I'll put in a moment the full bios for our panelists in the chat so you can see the entire thing. So, Professor Yifat Bitton is president of Achva Academic College of Education and Science in Southern Israel. She is a prominent legal academic and social change activist who chairs Tmura, the Legal Center for Equality. Professor Bitton has won myriad prizes in Israel and abroad for her transformative human rights activism. And she has been shortlisted twice for Israel's Supreme Court as its youngest candidate. Professor Bitton holds a PhD in law from Hebrew University of Jerusalem and an LLM with honors from Yale University Law School. And last but not least, she will be visiting the University of Chicago in fall 2022. So you're welcome to invite her to speak in your communities while she's in the US. Avi Dabush is the CEO of Rabbis for Human Rights. Avi was raised in a national religious home in the southern town of Ashkelon, now lives in Sderot. Avi has been a grassroots activist on a broad spectrum of Israeli social and political issues, including poverty, workers' rights, and corporate social responsibility. He co-founded the Movement for the Future of the Western Negev, which calls for a political agreement between Israel and Gaza. And he also founded the Peripheries Movement and authored the recently published The Periphery Rebellion. Avi has twice been a candidate on the Meretz party Knesset slate and created the party's Peripheries Headquarters, which established 10 municipal branches. And prior to joining Rabbis for Human Rights, he served as program director for Shatil, the New Israel Fund's action arm in Israel. Last but certainly not least, Professor Yossi Yona holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Pennsylvania. He's an emeritus professor in the Department of Education of Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and he's published extensively on topics ranging from philosophy to social and political science to cultural studies. In 2011, Professor Yona co-headed the advisory board of Israel's mass social justice protest movement. And from 2015 to 19, he served as a member of Knesset on behalf of the Labour Party. Professor Yona recently published a second novel, Very Good Figs, which depicts the saga of an Iraqi Jewish family. And among his many pro bono activities, he serves on the boards of the Babylonian Jewry Heritage Center and the progressive think and do tank, the Achva Center. Now let me hand it over to Professor Yifat Bitton. I'll rejoin you all at the end for a few closing remarks. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you very much, Ron, for this introduction, and welcome everybody. This is such a great honor and pleasure for us all to be able to speak to such a distinguished cohort of people interested in Israel and in its more hidden parts, the ones that are less frequently discussed within the Jewish communities in Israel. I do want to first extend our gratitude to Partners for Progressive Israel for organizing this webinar. And what we want to do today is, as you may have noticed from the introduction that was put forward by Ron, the three of us are very much involved for, I think, decades now in social activism in Israel. We're all sharing the ancestry of the Mizrahi ancestry and in a way a peripheral background. So the three of us together can discuss many issues, but at the same time, I think that the focus today will be on Professor Yona and on Mr. Dabush, and their presentations will make the focus of this night. But at the same time, I think that there's, like, I was thinking about how I should frame the discussion, and you know, when you need to think through framing as much as I had to, I think it brings to the fore just really at the outset how problematic the issue is when it comes to Jewish communities in the US and their ability to grasp exactly what goes on in Israel in terms of its social rifts within the Jewish society in Israel, like the Jewish population in Israel, as opposed to the main and, you know, and in these days bloodshedding rift between Jews and I must say some of course, the Arab group, but in other respects, not bloody, but definitely problematic and hurtful between Jews and Arabs. So what we will be discussing today is the intra-Jewish population in Israel and the kind of duality that exists between what we call the periphery in Israel and the center or centrally located hegemonic groups in Israel, and normally also colored by or identified through an origin relevance, namely people of an Ashkenazi descent are considered the hegemony in Israel. Of course, not all of them. Everything is being, you know, defined just for the sake of the discussion in that respect. But there's, of course, a grain of truth in this division. And the other part pertains to the decentralized Israel, the periphery of Israel, the way we call it here, of people of Mizrahi, mainly Mizrahi descent, and again, not only but mainly Mizrahi descent, and the division of social labor between these groups is in a way almost, I would say, all-encompassing in terms of the many differences that are relevant to the two groups, mainly through levels of education, occupation, income, and so on and so forth. So the reason that I found it difficult to have this framing was because I was not sure that if I use the term periphery and central Israel, that would resonate to something that is very clear to American audience. And in this respect, this is a great opportunity for me to just, toss out this difficulty at my friend here, Professor Yossi Yona, who will be able to, of course, elaborate on the analytical maybe distinction between the two and analytical elaboration as to what the periphery means in Israel, and also to add, of course, and to go beyond these analytical definitions into what it means to live in Israel's periphery. Yossi, go ahead, please.
Okay, it's my turn. So, thanks, Ron, for inviting me to participate in this very intriguing, important meeting, convention, and for, of course, the partners of the Progressive Israel. And to you, Avi Dabush, thank you very much for writing this book and suggesting that I would participate in this discussion. Yes, I think if the challenges Yifat just presented to us is just to make some kind of analytical distinctions, and then of course to make some claims, and this is what I would try to do. And of course, which means is that the distinctions that I'm going to offer to you guys is that take it for granted. It's kind of that it is tentative and it is not conclusive, but at least it would enable us to launch a discussion, some kind of analytical agreed that will enable us to continue on. Okay, so the first analytical distinction, I make a distinction between a geographical and social periphery. While there are affluent settlement and geographical periphery of Israel, there are also urban and metropolitan peripheries, along with the disadvantages that will allude. What I mean by that is that usually when we're using the word periphery, we're talking about geographical periphery, which is far removed from the metropolitan areas of Israel. But then, the problem that we have is usually, when we're talking about periphery, of course, they are associated with the disadvantages. So what I would like to add here that, of course, that we have in the metropolitan some kind of peripheries. And so, and at the same time that we're talking about geographical peripheries, there are affluent neighborhoods and cities in the geographical periphery. Now, the second point that I want to make is that about the deprived geographical peripheries populated previously mainly by Jews coming from Arab countries, and later on by sizable number of Jewish immigrants, either from former Soviet Union and from Ethiopia. By some extrapolation, what I'll say about geographical peripheries can be applied more or less to urban metropolitan peripheries. Okay, now there's a short odyssey into history, which is necessary here, which to be honest, that it reverberates also into present, and I hope that it would not reverberate into the future. Peripheral towns were originally designed for people who were viewed more as tools than agents of free will. And what I mean by that, they were stripped of the choice as well they wished to live or to settle, and perceived as tools facilitating national vital interests. Let me cite two of them, and maybe the most important reason for that. First, they were inhabiting vast and vacuous areas, thus asserting state's control and authority over them. Oftentimes, these towns were built close by the borders with Arab countries. Thus, they constituted buffer zone for the nascent state. Again, the second national interest is the following: they fulfill a crucial role in transforming the economy of the budding state from agrarian economy to industrial economy. And this transition, the population of the peripheries plays the role of blue-collar constituencies. The leading mindset of that time, which continues and to linger nowadays, have depicted this population as unfit for jobs demanding high cognitive and professional skills. Thus, we have witnessed the emerging Israeli ethno-working class. Add to this that most industrial ventures have been located until recently in these areas, which were not under jurisdiction. They are not under the jurisdiction of the towns themselves. Thus, revenues and taxes escapes from these ventures. They channeled elsewhere. Maybe we have an opportunity to talk about the final destination of the capital. Thus, these towns have been doomed to structural disadvantageous position vis-a-vis life prospect of their inhabitants. Their children have enjoyed poor educational opportunities. The towns were devoid of major cultural and scientific centers and lack job markets offering high education oriented and lucrative positions. As I was saying, history reverberates into the present time. Here we go again. The decision taken by the government to build or establish 5 new exclusive Jewish towns in the Negev, this was just about a week ago, allowing them to employ strict admission committees. The cost of infrastructure, and this is to give you an example of what it means, required for each settlement is 10 times more than adding a similar size new neighborhood and the existing towns, which is amazing. Just again, if you want to build this kind of community, newly built, it would cost 10 times as much as building another neighborhood and the existing peripheral communities. And now, of course, the most serious problem that we're facing here is what I call the creaming off. And what does it mean, the creaming off? Well, the purpose of these new established communities to be built, I don't know when, in the near future, is to attract strong population from the metropolitan who want to run away from the bustling cities, seeking quality of life that tight-knit communities would allow them. This is what I call the Israeli version of going back to nature, if you wish. One of the unfortunate results of the establishment of such communities is the well-known phenomena of creaming off, meaning higher echelon individuals born and raised in the periphery seek infiltration or admission to these communities, undermining attempts of the peripheral towns to use its inner strength to become robust, economically and culturally speaking. Thus, we get a blighted vicious circle. And maybe there's another problem that is manifested by Yifat and me, is that we also were raised and born in the periphery, that we actually manifesting this problem of screaming off because we also left the periphery and we are settling presently and the big metropolitan. Well, again, because it's a problem that the peripheral towns do not actually offer the opportunities for people who actually are gaining high educations or high skills to continue and living there. And now I want to actually to come up with an anecdote that I was personally involved in it. I was a member of parliament, as was mentioned in the introductory note. And when serving as an MK, I took part in forming a parliamentarian coalition opposing such an initiative. None of the mayors of these towns attended it. They either accept the role assigned to them, being a buffer zone, or if you wish, kind of expanding control or ensuring control of state over these empty areas. And then the question is, the interesting question comes up to, what is their role? Because at the very beginning, and here I want to conclude at least this round of discussion, I was mentioning this distinction between a free agent or active agent and a tool. So in the 50s, you might say, well, look, I mean, they were perceived that peripheral towns and their populations as tool, meaning that they were stripped of free choice, they were put there, and that's it. But now the situation is different. Now we see emerging political figures, Mizrahi Jews of Arab background. And the unfortunate, I'd say, a situation now we're encountering that we are not able, so it is not that we're pointing at the government and saying, well, the government is just, kind of exploiting and using these people. But we also see the very unfortunate, sad situation whereby there's no political force. And I think that Avi Dabush would talk about that because this is his vision, to come up with this kind of idea, how to coalesce forces existing and peripheral towns in order to become a forceful political power, whereby, so that's transforming or actually assuming a different role that being assumed in the past, meaning that we are not tools, we are not only tools, at least, kind of facilitating national goals, but we want also to think about our well-being, our life prospect of the people living there. So I'm saying to what we have seen in the last years, unfortunately, that they were not strong or effective option being formulated, being developed within the peripheral towns that actually would resist the policies of the government. Because, okay, the end of the day, I think that the government is mainly to blame for this, what I'm calling the vicious circle, whereby we're having this screaming off. And I think this is the problem. This is the main problem. It is not as the people are less talented and things like that. But the situation is the sad situation whenever there is an echelon, an intellectual and skillful kind of a strata is being kind of formed in these places, it leaves the place. Either it goes to the exclusive committee-oriented communities in the Negev and elsewhere.
Yossi?
Yeah, I'm going to finish. Yeah, so we have like this kind of a trap. So we have the screaming, and I think that if I would say a main problem plaguing the peripheral, at least in these towns, is the screaming of phenomena that is being actually encouraged, I would say, not even intentionally, but definitely by the government.
Thank you very much, Yossi, for this very clear and determined, in a way, claim that you've put forward. And I think that in your words, in your last words, you were in a way referring to Avi's contentions about the potential of the periphery to be a moving force of progression, maybe not in the socio-economic relevance at this time, but definitely in other terms, maybe. Avi, I think that it is very clear that in your book you're making such a claim, and you were also experiencing the periphery, first-handedly, and you still live there. So it would be wonderful to hear from your point of view how it looks like.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening for you, and good afternoon or good day for our visitors. Thank you for a partner for Progressive Israel. And it's good to be with friends. Yifat and Yossi are dear friends and colleagues, and actually kind of leaders in those terms, in terms of economic and social and political terms. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I will start by saying that for us, of course, and I hope that for a lot of people that will hear us, it is really important to emphasize that this is an important issue. I believe that this is a crucial issue in terms of the ability of the Israeli society to flourish. It's not only, of course, it's about my kids in Sderot and the kids of Rat and Ofakim and other places. Bedouin, Arabs, Jews, we talked about Oriental Jews, Mizrahi people, former Ethiopian, Russian-speaking, and so on. People who live in low class and in poverty and in the peripheries in terms of geographical peripheries and economic peripheries. But it is also, and maybe even more, very important for the Israeli society. We can see in research that the countries who have very much big gaps in terms of economic and social gaps are countries that can't really flourish because there is no trust between the people inside the society. There is more crime, and we see other parameters that are really bad. And we can see that in countries like, of course, the Scandinavian countries that we are always as a socialist or social democratic political people see them as kind of a model. We can see that this is the opposite. And so I hope that you will agree that it's not about a sector. It's not about my kids. It's not only about my kids and the kids of the peripheries. So this is the first thing that I would like to emphasize. The second is to talk about my experience. I wrote the book mainly for the young people in the peripheries, because for me, it took something like 25 years to understand. Gandhi is saying that the happiest person is the one that never left his village, because you need to leave your village in order to know your village and in order to know in which world you are in. So in 2002, I started to lead this campaign, this environmental campaign in Ashkelon, where I was born and raised in Orthodox, religious, right-wing, Mizrahi-oriented family. And then it was maybe the first time that I really fully started to understood what it is for people to live in the periphery, and not only in terms, and I will talk about the tip of the iceberg, the thing that we can see and the thing that we can measure. Of course, the government is measuring a lot of things, but the thing that hidden for us. And I started this campaign. It was against a plan of a coal power station building in Ashkelon, which is, of course, bad. In Israel, it took many years for the environmental movement to get established and be very clear. So we were students, and we started to talk with people in Ashkelon, which were from Ashkelon and Kiryat Gat and all around. And people told me, why are you dealing with environmental stuff? Like, are you an Ashkenazi? It's not fitting your place, your identity. And what this plan going to be? If it's going to bring us jobs, we are in favor of that. And if not, we are indifferent of that. And many people told me, where did they got the decision? They got the decision in Jerusalem. We don't have any connection to this Jerusalem. We don't know how to influence Jerusalem in terms of the government and the Knesset and so on. We can't even know how to talk with this Jerusalem. And this started for me, as I mentioned, it was many years, 25 years it took me to understand that there are things that I can't see. And it's kind of a political weakness. It's not only about salary, and I can say that the average salary in the Negev is half than the salary in Tel Aviv. And it's not only about education. We can see that in Ramat HaSharon, in the center of Israel, it's 50 times more, they got honor graduation than Sderot, Ofakim, and Raat. And it's not about health. We can see that in the Negev, we live in average 4 years less than people in the center of Israel. And this is, in a way, it's shocking for me, those things. But in a way, it's the easiest thing because we can see it. There is no argument about the data. But as I mentioned, there are a lot of things that we can't see, like what is going on or what happened to people that live in the periphery and know their power. Of course, they know no one is listening to them, even if we are talking about right-wing politics or left-wing politics. And this is why in 2015, we established the Peripheries Movement. And it was really interesting because it was after the elections of 2015, and I was a candidate in Meretz. I was in the 8th place. We got 5 seats. And then it started an whole issue of people in the left that are saying that the periphery is voting for the one that harms them. Of course, it was not politely as I'm saying that. And it was so patronizing. And of course, it's part of the reason that the left wing doesn't have any connection to the peripheries. But interestingly enough, the Peripheries Movement was established by political people from the left and from the right. And how is it possible in Israel? There is a polarization in Israel and other, of course, democratic countries, because we understand fully, and we still, unfortunately, understand that left or right wing politics doesn't count us, doesn't see us, doesn't have any interest in our interest and in our common good. So only about this question, about the voting, because it is very interesting for political people in Israel. I believe that it's in an interest of the people that are listening to us. Of course, we can see that when we are talking about Jews in the periphery, I want to say, firstly, most of the people in the periphery or most of the towns are voting much less than the people in the center. And it is really interesting. If we are talking about the Bedouin society, which is the poorest in Israel, it's something like 40% are going to vote. The national average is 70. And if we are talking about the development towns like Sderot, for example, it's something like 55, something like that. So we can see that if we are asking ourselves why the Jewish periphery in Israel is voting to the right wing, the first answer, of course, it's not true, because most of the people or a lot of the people are not voting, that they don't feel connected to the system, they are not feel connected or hereby the government or the Knesset and so on. The second answer is, of course, it's true, and it's about identity and about the ideology. And the left-wing parties doesn't make any effort to understand what is going on, what is their interest. It is really fascinating to compare what is happening in Israeli politics right now to what happened in Israeli politics in the 60s, because now it's times of we don't want Bibi, then it was we don't want Ben-Gurion, and the parties with Mapai didn't want to go to a coalition with Mapai, with the Labour Party, because of Ben-Gurion, exactly how it is right now with Netanyahu. And then Herut, which was the Begin's party, they started to think that this is their big chance and they can do a revolution in terms of politics. And then they tried in '65 and they got this coalition with the liberals, and they failed. And that was the first time that they started to make a long shot or a deep work in the peripheries. And it's really interesting because what they did is to establish a lot of branches in the peripheries to bring many more leaders from the peripheries. Of course, then it was especially Mizrahi-oriented Jews into the Likud. And of course, the right-wing parties in Israel don't know how to do it or don't want to do it. And the other thing is to bring solutions to questions like poverty, like housing, like salaries, and so on. And exactly right now in Israel, we have, of course, the same questions. So it was really interesting to see that there are solutions, but the left-wing politics doesn't want to take this solution. And Professor Yona talked about the power. And this is the question. So when we are talking about politics, we have to talk about power. And this,
so this
of
is,
course, yeah.
So this is maybe, Avi, it's a good opportunity to rethink power through what Professor Yona just mentioned before, and link it to what you said at the end of your talk, when you said that, in a way, the right-wing parties in Israel know how to do it and care about it, whereas the left-wing parties are not as interested, as convinced that this is possible, as have the.
I just want to make it clear that they did that in the 60s. So part of the voting right now is about identity and history. They are not doing that right now, because the question is, of course, if the right is in power for so many years, how is it possible that those gaps are in the peripheries right now? So they used to do it. It's the big challenge for my perspective, of course, to the left, but it's a big challenge, of course, to the all of the political system. And that's why I think that it's those terms, it's good terms, I can say, or the right terms for rebellion in a way. And this is going to happen, maybe in a year, maybe in 5 years or 10 years, but I'm really optimistic that something have to happen, because there is a very big gap and a split between the system and between the interest of the people in the periphery.
So Yossi, would you agree with that? Would you be as optimistic as Avi is, because you were there and you worked exactly in this direction, and it's interesting to hear from you whether this optimism, you still share it. And is it an optimism, if I may say, an optimism or pessimism that you would feel vis-a-vis the communities in the periphery, or maybe vis-a-vis the leftist communities in the center, that maybe they should have allowed you more space to pursue these type of political missions?
There are two points that I want to make. First, in terms of what Avi was saying, the difference between political parties. There are political parties who know how to mobilize people. There are political parties who don't know how to mobilize people. But in both cases, I don't think that they really care about the fate of the periphery. So this is one point. Another point, as to your question, and this is what Avi was saying, about the possibility of some eruption, some kind of an action taken by the periphery. I don't know about that, and I was a chief advisor to the protest, the social protest held in Israel in 2011. And this is the one thing, that I think that what, if I may refer to Hannah Arendt, who's saying that this is kind of a miracle thing, that when people come together spontaneously and saying enough is enough. So which means is that the conditions, and this is half optimism that I would offer you, Yifat, or to Avi. What I mean by that, half optimism.
My optimism is totally different.
No, what I mean by that is that I would agree with Avi that the conditions for rebellion or for resistance, let's put it, kind of a more muted word, for resistance. The conditions for resistance, for people taking the street and protest are there, no doubt about that. And I fully agree with what Avi was saying in terms of the galaxies running away from each other and terms the socio-economic gaps in Israel, so it is obvious. I mean, vis-a-vis, when we compare Israel to other democratic countries, that we see that we're lagging almost behind all democratic countries in terms of the number of poor people living under the poverty line, or people who are living under the poverty line, and many other indicators, in that respect. So, but we already know, and this is in fact what I mean by giving you only half optimism, that we have known, in many cases in history that people were living in a dire situation and do nothing. So what would be the igniting mechanism, if you wish, that would make it? What have made, what caused that person in Tunis, and to go and start the social movement there, or in Egypt and many other countries? We don't know. So this is where I'm going back to Hannah Arendt is saying it is miracle, and miracle in the sense that that you cannot anticipate, you cannot forecast, if you wish, the coming of the revolution. So what I'm saying is, well, the conditions are ripe. The conditions are ripe, but would that mean that is deterministic, teleological kind of explanation, that the moment that you have ripe conditions, then the eruption would come? Who knows? Who knows? But I agree that the conditions are ripe.
Okay, thank you very much. Avi, do you want to?
I would like to hear about your optimism.
So my optimism is structured along lines of gender and the way I see it, as Ron indicated at first, I'm the president of an academic institution in the periphery, actually across the road from Kiryat Malachi, the underprivileged town where I was born and raised, and I got back there as a professor to head this institution. And whenever I look outside my window, seeing my campus, 90% composed of women, women that are very typically women of the periphery of Israel. And I've seen a comment in one of the Q&As where you haven't at all put your questions, our dear audience members. Someone said something about, so is it just a Jewish periphery? Why are we not including the Arab periphery, mainly where I have my institution located, the Bedouin periphery of Israel? And there are many differences between these groups, to an extent that I think it's not very productive to think of them as one, but definitely to think of them as relevant to the discussion in some through some points. So the relevance that I bring to the fore is to look outside my window and see women that are generally speaking traditional women, coming from with a very strong sense of belonging to their traditional origins. Women, Jewish women with cover to their heads, and Bedouin women definitely wearing hijabs. And it is very clear that they all feel so comfortable with one another, even through the atrocities of what's going on here and the tensions now in Israel. They of course, it's very natural for them to feel a bit fearful and worried as to where things are going. But I can tell you that today, for example, we just had a huge conference on hope and meaningness in Israeli society, and in an amazing coincidence, this day was celebrated. We were celebrating a very feminine type of hope here, whereby whereas in outside the campus it was very turbulent. So I think there's something about the not rebellious, Avi. You're talking about the Periphery Rebellion, and I definitely treat myself as a rebel myself throughout my activist career. But I think that maybe this is part of my current understanding, that it's not necessarily a revolution in which you have to throw all of your past behind you and move forward and progress with the progressive values that are offered by the left, but rather think of a way in which these groups can live in their communities, but still have these locations where they can communicate in a very organic manner, not necessarily structured to have a revolution appear. And I see a lot of hope outside my window.
Yeah, I don't think about revolution only in terms of struggling, as we said, demonstration and so on. I just want to thank you because it is so important. In the Bedouin community, it is a miracle because it's the only traditional society that in 20 years it decreased the rate of women, of children, from 10.6 to a family to 4.9, and it's only because the education of the women. So I really believe in that, and you are doing such an important work. And I really agree, because I think I'm in a lot of ways religious myself, and now I'm a rabbinical student and so on. So I believe in miracles, but also part of our shared tradition, I believe, really connected to what you mentioned. It's not about breaking the chains and leave the history and break the history. We saw those big revolutions and what they did. But I'm talking about repairing, about tikkun, we are saying about Judaism, but only, it's interesting because I was in Yerucham with the book, and they were saying like, why Periphery Rebellion? Let's talk about evolution, not revolution, and so on. And that was the first time that I thought that the name of the book, that I wasn't sure about it, it's a very good name, because we must understand that it will come with it's not an easy turning point. It's not an easy way. We are talking about deep change. We are talking about the people, of course, in the high class and the center, the geographical and economic center, have to give up, or we will take something that they think that they are belonging. And in the feminist movement, we can say that sometimes for those people, equality seems like an oppression. So it wouldn't be easy. So in that terms, it is a rebellion, but I really agree that it can be. I hope that it will be some kind of rebellion that will be repairing and a tikkun and not breaking.
Yeah.
May I ask
Thank you very much. Yossi, just a second, if I may, please, because I have noticed two new questions on our Q&A box. So there's one anonymous attendee asking, what would it take for there to be a political alliance of all members of the periphery that Avi Dabush mentioned, Bedouin, Russian, Savitan. So I think in a way, well, what I presented here is the shared spaces of bringing these people together without necessarily asking them maybe to have themselves stripped of their traditions and their, in a way, really tribal belonging, and looking deeper into their traditional cultures to look for shared commonalities, not necessarily from the liberal, curriculum that we have. So this is my answer, but if any of you wants to add something, I would love to.
I mean, a way of question even to Avi, that because you were mentioning before the ability to form some kind of alliance that transcends right wing and left wing belonging, and this is that I look at it as an obstacle, and I'm asking you for kind of if you have an optimistic take on that. I see it as an obstacle because as I was saying before, many times I do see that how the national interest actually overcome or compromises the fate of the periphery. And I cannot even underestimate the power of ruling government to track the attention of the people from their interests into other things, So my question to you is that sort of if you can come up with some kind of optimistic way, take on that. To what extent is it possible to transcend, these kind of differences that what you have seen, in your experience, that would enable transcending and building a force in the periphery and saying, hey, our interest is first, and then either translating it into political power, party-like politics, or civil movement,
exactly.
What do you have to say about,
civil partnership?
Again, I really like the notion of miracles, because we need miracles, and it is kind of a miracle that all those people will work together, and it's kind of a liberal fantasy that most of the time we can't really do it, or we fail to do. I just want to mention two examples that we did so in the Negev. One of them is the Negev Council, which is a very optimistic thing that I'm one of the establishers of the Negev Council. All of the mayors in the Negev, Bedouins and Jews, regional councils and development towns are in line together or in this net of the Negev Council. Of course, without, there are disagreement, of course, and we can't deal with any issue together. But for example, we are working together towards a second hospital in the Negev, and we're working towards an airport in the Negev. There is a national debate about it. Will be in the north or in the Negev, and actually it is interesting because we have shared the campaign with the north. They don't want the airport, and we do want the airport. So this is the first example. And the other one is the Equality March. In 2016, we did this march from Yerucham to Jerusalem. And it was interesting because it was in Ramadan days. We are now, tomorrow, Ramadan will start. And we were marching, and each day we were visiting another community. So there was an iftar in Segev Shalom, which is the meal after the feast of fasting in the day of the Ramadan in Segev Shalom, Bedouin village, and then in Rat, which is the biggest city, the biggest Bedouin city. And then we had Kabbalat Shabbat in Kiryat Gat, and then we have a very big visit in Kiryat Malachi with a lot of young people, and then in Bet Shemesh with the Haredi and mayors. And that was a time that we could see that if we are very clear about the interest, it was about education, and it was about more budgeting the peripheries, because the gaps.
What about the new settlements to be built there? I mean, is there a position that do you think that you are able to form a resistance kind of cross-border?
It's interesting because right now the Negev Council is split in this question. 5 or 6 years ago, we were together in a campaign against this program, or more or less, and we succeeded. And right now, there's a split inside of the Negev Council, so I don't know how to answer that. But I really believe that, as I mentioned, it's a kind of a miracle, but we need a clear vision, and we need to work very hard. It is what I mentioned, that the left, the right wing, Cherut, Begin's party, did. You know, that they understood that, and they did this work from 65 till 77. They did a very hard work. And we need to do this work. You know, in my party, in Meretz, the first places, Nitzan Horowitz and Tamar Zandberg, are living in the same street in Tel Aviv. So this is crazy. They are friends. It's not about that, of course. But this is crazy. In a way, the left forgot what is it to be left. So I really believe that we have to make this revolution from inside, and then go to the people and really understand their interest and start to fight for their interest. And it will take years, of course. It's not about weeks or months. It will take years.
I think the civilian partnership that is being forged in these days through the examples that you gave, through the campus that I had, through other venues that are developing with time and being more and more prevalent and empowered, there is great hope for collaboration that maybe starts through, you know, very immediate needs, but then will grow into a more sophisticated claim for redistributive justice for the whole region. Thank you so much, my dear friends and brothers, if I may say in this respect, for the time we shared here and the time we share elsewhere in Israel. Ron, are you going to be able to join us? I think we've been pretty effective in trying to answer most of the questions posed by the audience, and we thank you for being with us this evening, our evening.
Thank you, Yifat. Yes, your evening, some people's mornings even. I understood, first of all, from a few comments that I was a little bit less than perfectly audible. To start out, I apologize. I'll look at my systems, and I hope I'm a little bit more audible now. So thank you, Yifat, Yossi, and Avi, for taking your time and expanding on a topic that I think a lot of folks need to learn a lot more about. You know, when people in the States think about Israel, they think, oh, you know, in binary terms of Israel versus Palestine, Jews, Arabs, secular, religious. And so this is another aspect that goes on in Israeli society. And I think it would be worthwhile for Americans to delve into this more. And I hope, Avi, your book gets translated into English very soon and gives people a handhold on that. So thanks for everyone tuning in. Thanks to the staff and board members who helped make this discussion happen. I'll just note again that while today's program has been free, generous contributions enable the organization to deliver these events at no cost. So if you have a moment and you can, please visit progressiveisrael.org, check out upcoming programming, and if you can, make a donation. Thank you and stay informed, and see you next time.
Thank you, להתראות.
תודה רבה.
ביי.
ביי, להתראות.
להתראות.